You know, after telling you that I realized from the power of the Holy Spirit, the revelation that the covenant with many is a blood covenant, and that blood covenant would be strengthening the covenant that the Jews had with God from the beginning by a blood sacrifice of the red heifer. Well, I just wanted to cover a couple of details about the red heifer and what some of these Muslim skeptics wrote this article. So this was titled Red Cows and 40 Decapitated Babies, Israel Trying to Start the Apocalypse. And the reason why I'm sharing this article is not because I agree with everything, but I'm just trying to show you what the Muslims are thinking. And when the Muslims are stating that the red heifer will be sacrificed, which corresponds to when I told you that it would be at Passover of 2024 coming up at the end of April. So it says, by now you've probably heard all the ludicrous, unsubstantiated propaganda about Hamas supposedly decapitating 40 babies in some kibbutz. I mean, don't get me wrong, if it were actually true, which it clearly isn't, then it would make them absolute monsters. It would mean that merely going around killing babies, which is completely forbidden in Islam, wasn't enough, and they had enacted some sort of ritual slaughter, also completely forbidden in Islam. One is horrifically reminded of babies being smashed against rocks, as mentioned in Psalms 137:9. This propaganda was, of course, readily embraced by the Zionist apologists and promoted by the likes of Ben Shapiro, perhaps the most famous Israeli nationalist in the United States. But there's some relatively recent news that most may have missed, which seems to now make sense in eschatological terms. For the first time in millennia, Zionists have finally managed to procure a suitable red heifer, something that is required for their temple ceremony. Famed journalist Lawrence Wright wrote in The New Yorker in 1998, years ago, as Lot read the Bible that day, he realized that the second coming and the fate of humankind now depended on the red heifer. The farmer's name was Lot. That was the farmer of the red heifers down in the south there. In order for the Jews to rebuild the temple and prepare the way for the return of the Messiah, they must be purified with the ashes of the red heifer. According to Maimonides in the Talmud, a qualified red heifer had not been found in Israel in almost 2,000 years. The Temple Institute operates a small museum in the Jewish quarter of the Old City. A visitor steps down into a basement room that houses the collection. In a bookstore, one of the books on display is The Mystery of the Red Heifer, Divine Promise of Purity by Rabbi Richman. Also on display is a scale model of the sacrificial altar and replicas of the decanters and lavers used in the temple service. The flaxen robes of the priests have been carefully reproduced, along with the trumpets, harps, and lyres that the Levites are said to have played in the courtyard of the temple. You woke up in the morning to the sound of music from the temple, and you went to bed to the sound of music from the temple. A guide tells visitors any beautiful building you ever saw cannot compare with the beauty of the temple. The goal of the Institute is not only to restore the temple itself, but to reinstate the priestly castes, clerical rule, and animal sacrifice that characterized the nation of Israel at the dawn of the Iron Age. To secular Israelis, this sounds like a Jewish version of the Taliban, and yet the construction of a third temple is essential to the view that many Orthodox Jews have of salvation and the coming of the Messiah. Without the temple, there is no way to fulfill many of the religious obligations, they think, such as ritual sacrifices that the Torah requires in Orthodox theology, and that means that all Jews are stuck in a state of impurity and are therefore unable to be in the presence of God. And when a glass is broken at a Jewish wedding, it is done in memory of the destruction of the temple. The holy temple in Judaism is so important and primary that it can really be said that Judaism, as it is practiced today, is not the vehicle that God intended it to be, Richmond says. The prophets of Israel emphasize the fact that the temple is really much more than just a synagogue. The temple is actually the device through which God manifests his presence to mankind. And that's why Jesus said, he's talking about the temple of his body, because God manifested himself in the Messiah's body. And we read in a more recent Yahoo News article from July of 2023, those 5 perfectly unblemished red heifers landed in Israel, of course, in September of 2022, a feat that cost around $500,000. When you factor in the first-class plane tickets for rabbis to come examine the heifers and the American Airlines trip to Israel, they're now being taken care of at a secure location, and Stinson and others hope to hold the ceremony they will be used for during Passover in 2024. Stinson runs a nonprofit called Bona Israel that helps build up and revive biblical sites. The goal of the whole ceremony is unity, Stinson said in a video interview from Israel Wednesday. Why search for a cow? An excerpt from Bona Israel's website reads, and these red heifers can bring world peace. They never will. The Bible teaches us that the key for building the third temple, the house of prayer for all nations, is purifying us with the red heifer in Jerusalem. Speaking of the Jews worldwide, being purified with the ashes, which can never take away their sins. If you're wondering how such a ceremony works, the short of it is that at the end, one of the heifers will die. But while there are 5 heifers, only one will be needed for the ceremony. They'll mix the ashes of the heifer with water from Israel's Gihon spring and other ingredients and sprinkle that water on members of the priesthood and the workers and tools for the temple. The ceremony needs to happen at the Mount of Olives, just like it did in the Bible. According to the Jerusalem Post, the red heifer appears in a portion of the book of Numbers 19:3 that reads, "This is the ritual law that God has commanded. Instruct the Israelite people to bring you a red cow without blemish, in which there is no defect and on which no yoke has been laid. The water and ash mixture is supposed to remove impurities from touching a corpse. Such a ceremony has likely never taken place," Stinson believes. "I don't think the Jewish fathers, they haven't done this in 2,000 years, Stinson said. I've never done it. Then they've never done it. So after all this time, they finally acquired their special spotless red cow." So now you got to listen to this. So after all this time, they finally acquired their special spotless red cow. And Passover 2024, which falls towards the end of April, is the special time for this peculiar ceremony, which is supposed to hail the third temple. Others, however, speak of Shavuot of 2024, which corresponds to June. And in case you're wondering, the exact dates of Passover 2024, it begins the evening of Monday, April 22nd, and ends the evening of Monday, April 29th. So sometime in there, this ceremony is expected to take place. And this Islamic article is verifying that this is part of what the conflict is about right now with the war in Israel. Is this a strange messaging behind the number 40, that after the tribulation in a conflict that includes the supposed decapitation of children, there'll be some kind of rebirth of the Jewish nation, that is, through the third temple And what better symbol is there for them than babies? A baby is, of course, the very symbol of birth, following a very demanding test, pregnancy and childbirth. So this hoax regarding the supposed killing of the babies acquires a new metaphysical meaning. So, how Israel was born in a day as a nation, and now they're saying it's going to birth, these are the birth pangs of the Messiah, and to have Israel be born into the Messianic era of redemption. And it makes sense, especially when you know that Benjamin Netanyahu is surrounded by hardcore religious ultra-Zionists who unapologetically embrace such a worldview, including Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Israeli National Security Minister. We read in a Jewish Currents article from January of 2023, on January 3rd, Israeli Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir visited the Temple Mount or Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem. After years of intensified incursions by Israeli forces that have heightened tensions in the area, Ben-Gvir's visit intended to send a message. He and his party of Messianic religious nationalists hope to replace the Dome of the Rock with the Third Temple. Well, this is the Islamic view, of course, but I've heard it said that they plan to build it in a space that is north of there as well. So, okay, then they were openly daring Palestinian protesters and resistance groups to stop him. In the days leading up to Ben-Gvir's ascent to the Temple Mount, Hamas leadership in Gaza described Ben-Gvir's impending visit as a detonator and vowed it would respond forcefully. So, was this the spark that lit the fuse of the current war? Orthodox rabbinical authorities have long held that Jews are strictly forbidden from ascending to the Temple Mount. According to Jewish law, entering the site, which housed the Second Temple 2 millennia ago, requires a special purification ritual, washing with water mixed with the ashes of a red heifer, a type of cow not seen since the temple's destruction. With the extreme right in power, the biggest test of the tension between its eschatological agenda and the imperatives of governance will come in April, when Passover and Ramadan coincide. For the last several years, this period has seen consistent Israeli incursions into the Temple Mount area aimed at curtailing Palestinian access to the site, which Palestinians have generally met with resistance. Temple Mount activists have also recently attempted to carry out the ancient ritual of the Passover sacrifice on the Temple Mount, but have always been thwarted by the Israeli police. Last year, 4 men who planned to sacrifice a goat and incite fighting between Arabs and Jews were arrested. Itamar Ben-Gvir, now head of the police, going to stop them again? I think he would allow it to happen, Inbari said, and meanwhile the Temple Mount movement has made strides in religious preparations for a more robust Jewish return to the site. Now in Israel there are red heifers, Inbari said. According to a September 2022 report in the Jerusalem Post, a Christian rancher in Texas had sent 5 of these specifically bred cattle to the Temple Institute to be raised for later use in the temple purification ritual. And so they invoke their God's name. And it says, he knows best. It's astounding, though, to know that Zionists wish to brutalize the people of Islam in the name of a cow, when we are aware of the accounts surrounding the golden calf, or the fact that the longest surah chapter of the noble Quran, the second surah of the Quran, is named after an account involving a yellow cow, and the stubbornness of some of the historical Jews, or even the fact that some of the Muslim Ummah's most vocal enemies are cow worshippers from a different religion. The cow, associated with innocence in its gaze and purity in its milk, has had its symbolism radically inverted, as though the times of the Antichrist, false Messiah, will not merely be times of manifest falsehood, but times of the truth being reversed and parodied. Now remember, this is an Islamic article. I would like to just conclude by saying very clearly that I am in no way implying that the recent Palestinian attacks are themselves the product of some Israeli conspiracy. They may very well be a way for Palestinians to commemorate the 50 years of the Yom Kippur War, October 1973. However, the continued Israeli provocations, greatly intensified throughout these past few years, could also possibly have been meant to trigger some sort of drastic response in an attempt to bring about the eschatological and apocalyptic end goals discussed here. And that being said, it's crucial that we never forget that nothing whatsoever happens without the will and permission of God. We must always bear this in mind and face the trials of this world with patience and endurance. Our ultimate reward lies in the hereafter. Everyone is completely powerless before God, including every deluded tyrant and oppressor to ever step foot on this temporal earth. The time for their utter humiliation will surely come, and they will pay dearly for their crimes in the hereafter. And I thought this was really interesting because this was an Islamic Muslim article, and they are actually stating here that the intention is definitely that this red heifer ceremony is going to happen in April, this coming spring. So that brings me to this other article written October 20th of 2023 and written by Zachary Emanuel. A red heifer is the secret to understanding the Israeli-Hamas war. The editor left this note. Just like everything else on this site, the purpose of this article is not to convince you of a partisan side, but to provide important and largely unreported information. The sources used in our research range from Al Jazeera to Israel's Haaretz newspaper to the websites of ultra-religious Messianic Jewish groups. On October 7th, Hamas militants launched the most brutal attack on Israel in our lifetimes, and it was called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. We've heard and seen the many grisly details. Women and children kidnapped, families gunned down and taken hostage, bodies burned and mutilated. What is gone, curiously unreported in Western media, what is strangely missing from Wikipedia entries about the conflict is why the invasion happened when it did. The average observer either views the attacks as unprovoked terror or a justified response to the totality of the Israeli system. The real reason, the hidden war, might just blow your mind. The first clue is that the name of the Hamas invasion, which was titled Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound sits on a very famous hill known as the Temple Mount, or Holy Mount Moriah. For Jews, this is the holiest site in the world. It's the location of the first temple built by King Solomon some 3,000 years ago, the second temple, and that would be future third temple. For Muslims, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is the third holiest site in the world, containing the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself and the oldest standing Islamic structure in the world, the Dome of the Rock, built from 688 to 692 AD. And might I add here, the original location of the Garden of Eden, where mankind was created in the first place from the foundation stone on Holy Mount Moriah. And this is why David bought the threshing floor there to build the temple. And of course, he collected all the materials and gave the plans and instructions to Solomon, who was allowed to build it. So that's why it was built there, because it had been the Garden of Eden and the place of the creation of Adam and Eve. Although Israel has controlled Jerusalem since 1967, the Temple Mount is administered by the Jordanian-appointed Jerusalem Waqf and Al-Aqsa Mosque Affairs Department, with Israel controlling the gates of entry. Waqf permits Jews to visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as tourists, not to worship, an act that would be considered sacrilegious to the Islamic world. Nonetheless, the Chief Rabbinate of Israel forbids all visitation to the Temple Mount due to the impure nature of the site, a decision the vast majority of Israelis respect. In the last few years, this arrangement has disintegrated into a bloody mess. Fringe, ultra-religious Jewish groups have been encouraging their followers to pray openly at the Temple Mount. In 2019, at the end of the month of Ramadan, hundreds of Jewish ultra-nationalists entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound to celebrate Jerusalem Day, the first time the Israeli authorities had allowed them to do this in 30 years. The mosque's director bitterly complained that Israeli authorities had broken a promise not to enter during the final days of Ramadan. In April of 2022, 6 members of a Jewish extremist group were arrested for planning to sacrifice a goat on the Temple Mount during Passover. In April of 2023, amid rumors on social media of Jews heading to the Temple Mount to perform an animal sacrifice, Palestinian rioters illegally barricaded themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. In response, Israeli police entered the compound and raided the mosque, firing rubber bullets and using stun grenades, arresting those inside. These scenes of stone-throwing Palestinians, Jewish zealots, and Israeli police in riot gear are now familiar at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Rocket attacks from Hamas have duly followed each incident, along with Palestinian chants in the street, "In spirit and in blood, we will redeem Al-Aqsa." Days before the recent attacks, the situation had escalated to a critical point. On October 1st, thousands of ultra-religious Jews began to carry out religious, apparently provocative tours of the mosque complex. On October 4th, Al Jazeera reported that a group of them forced their way into the compound to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. They were protected by Israeli police who temporarily barred the holy site to many Muslims and mosque employees. For some Muslims, being denied access to Al-Aqsa was the straw that broke the camel's back. Egypt claims it warned Israel to expect retaliation, and just 3 days later, Hamas initiated Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. A few questions arise. After decades of permitting Muslim control of the site, why are thousands of ultra-Orthodox Israeli Jews suddenly intent on reclaiming the Temple Mount as a place of worship? And why did Hamas name Al-Aqsa as their occasion for war, neglecting the security of their own people and instead provoking an all-out existential war with Israel? The reason is both hidden and obvious, and it boils down to a red heifer. The secret of the red heifer. In September, a shadowy but powerful group known as the Temple Institute announced that the first red heifer in 2,000 years had been born in Israel. This wasn't their first red heifer. In September 2022, the Jerusalem Post reported that the Institute paid over $500,000 to fly 5 perfectly red, unblemished heifers from a Christian rancher in Texas to the land of Israel. Why the red heifer? The Temple Institute believes that this rare, unassuming creature is no less than the key to the fabled Third Temple. After the Romans obliterated the Second Temple in 70 AD, Jews spread far and wide across the earth. Yet they never forgot Zion and their sacred temple. 3 times a day, all observant Jews pray, "May the Holy Temple be rebuilt speedily and in our day." Most Jews do not believe in building the Third Temple themselves. Instead, they believe that God or the Messiah will rebuild the Third Temple when the time is right. However, a group of Israeli hardliners, The SANHEDRIN, I might add, the Temple Institute, and the Temple Mount Faithful are just two of the extremist ultra-Orthodox organizations whose primary mission is to rebuild the Third Temple in Jerusalem. They have built close ties with and receive financial assistance from Christian fundamentalist groups in the United States who believe a third Jewish temple will herald the return of Jesus to earth and the subsequent rapture. This influential but subterranean belief helps explain in part the United States' warm relationship with Israel. Today, most of the requirements to build the Third Temple are complete. In 1948, the Jewish nation was prophetically reborn, and in 1967, Jerusalem once again became a Jewish city. The Temple Institute has formally trained over 500 young Jewish men directly descended from the tribe of Levi as temple priests, going so far as to have already sewn their priestly garments and selected their sacred vessels. The Institute boasts it has created a temple in waiting, even preparing operational blueprints that conform with modern architectural standards. However, there is one last ingredient needed: the ashes of a red heifer. These ashes are essential for the temple priests to carry out their work, purifying them after touching corpses. The reason why God commanded the use of a red heifer without defect or blemish and that has never been under a yoke in Numbers 19:1-2 is unclear. Some people believe it's connected to the sin of the golden calf. Others accept it's a divine mystery behind our comprehension. But the qualifications for the heifer are precise. And might I add that in Babylon they worshipped the cow that had the crescent moon on its forehead. According to the Jewish Mishnah, the presence of even 2 black hairs invalidates the red heifer, or white hairs, and the heifer must also be 100% free from any internal or external blemish, never worked a day in its life, and be at least 3 or 4 years old. Such a perfect creature is so elusive that the Mishnah says its ceremonial burning has only happened 9 times in Jewish history. But the sage, Maimonides, believed that the 10th animal would only be found and sacrificed when the Messiah was ready to appear. So they're believing another master who's telling them to sacrifice this red heifer. And I told you the Lord had revealed to me that Maimonides, who's Maimon, is really Mammon, and that name is the name of a demon. So they will still be under their sins after performing this ceremony, because no red heifer can ever take away their sins. Only God dwelling as the living temple amongst his people and redeeming us back to a Garden of Eden-like state with his own blood. So when it was announced that a perfectly unblemished red heifer had been born in Israel, it caused great excitement in ultra-religious circles. Even academics had joined in on the craze in 2019. Professor Zohar Amar from Bar-Ilan University developed computational models that determine how many Jews would be purified from one burnt red heifer. This number is kind of interesting. So the amount of Jews that could be purified worldwide from the one burnt red heifer, he found the number to be 660 billion. Well, what if they add 6 to that? You would have 666 billion. 666. It's very close to that number. Next year, the red heifers from Texas will finally be of ripe age to sacrifice. The biblical nonprofit that helped procure them, Bona Israel, hopes that they will be sacrificed in Passover 2024, thus marking the last element needed for temple worship. So, this could definitely mean that we would be taken out of here before this event, because once that ceremony takes place and they try to strengthen the covenant that they've always had with God through the red heifer sacrifices that happened 2,000 years ago, they're strengthening that covenant in blood with agreeing to uphold God's laws of the Torah and all 613 of them. So we know that they will still be in their sins because the law was just a teacher and our true master is the Messiah. So they've traded out. They hate the one master and love the other. They love Mammon, and they will do whatever Mammon tells them to do, which is to sacrifice a 10th red heifer. But it can never take away their sins, so they will still be in their sins, and sin brings forth death, and so they will be making a covenant with death. So now Al-Aqsa is in danger, they say. Building the third temple is impossible without the demolition of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they think, and the Dome of the Rock. I don't agree with that statement, though. Before you accuse me of superimposing fears into a populace, keep in mind that the third temple looms large in Hamas's mind. In fact, Al-Aqsa is in danger, they think, is a popular political slogan used to oppose efforts by Jewish hardliners, and what they mean by that is the Sanhedrin, to take over the Temple Mount. Between 1996 and 2015, the annual Al-Aqsa in Danger Festival was the most attended Islamic festival in Israel. Hamas itself directly responded to the 5 red heifers landing in Israel, warning their followers that Jewish animal sacrifices on the Temple Mount would soon follow. In August of this year, the Islamic Middle East Monitor stated that Israel's red cow will blow up the region. Israel will now use this red cow, if one of them is deemed blemish-free, to impose new facts on the ground in, they say, occupied Jerusalem, the author said. A video from the Facebook of ultra-religious group Shalom Jerusalem, I think that's Yehuda Glick's group, in May of 2022, as they prepared their group to enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound on Jerusalem Day, quote, "There is nothing that expresses Jewish sovereignty better than the Temple Mount," end quote. The humanitarian situation in Gaza and the West Bank no doubt contributed to Hamas's reason for war, but Hamas, via actions like digging up its own water pipes to build rockets to fire against Israel, proudly demonstrates that it cares less for the safety and governance of its own people and more for the punishment of Israel. To fundamentalists like Hamas, Jews and Zionism represent no less than the Dajjal, comparable to the Antichrist in Christianity. Is it possible Hamas fighters genuinely believe that they are fighting to save the Dome of the Rock from the jaws of their version of the Antichrist? Is it possible that an extremist minority of Israelis are actively working to undermine the third holiest site in Islam in order to erect the Holy of Holies? And there is overwhelming proof for both, beginning with the name of Hamas's invasion of Israel, the flood or deluge of Al-Aqsa. So could this be one of the reasons why Jesus said it'll be like the days of Noah when he returns? Because Israel's enemies are calling this the flood and deluge of their mosque. If the events at the Temple Mount are not the sole motivation for war, they are certainly the spark for the flame. With the increasing escalations on the Temple Mount and the red heifers having arrived in Israel a while ago, religious elements from both sides view this as a now or never situation. This is not a war of geopolitics like Russia and Ukraine. This is a holy war, fought between the most extreme militant elements of two ethno-religious groups to either cause or prevent the end of the world. That's not to say that the majority of Israelis or even Palestinians want to fight this war. 99% of Israelis would consider the Temple Institute to be on the fringes of Orthodox Jewry and do not resonate with its practices. That's amazing. 99% of other Jews. And 99% of Israelis also don't spend their weekends going to the Temple Mount, either religiously vandalizing Al-Aqsa or gloriously reclaiming the site for God, depending on your point of view. But the few that do anger the hardline segments of the Muslim world, especially Palestinian Muslims, who respond with terrorism and rockets. This is a war escalated between the most religious extremist segments of both societies. And I told you that the statements from the Sanhedrin was really what was causing a lot of the anti-Semitism. Their own words were, they're saying to kill other people, Gentiles and other Jews that, don't follow their hardline ideas. And they're trying to implement their ancient system, including their Supreme Court, where they could convict people and stone them and do other executions. And while innocent civilians, women, and children are forced to suffer. That this conflict has the character of a holy war is necessary to understand it. It cannot be solved through military means. Piecemeal destruction of Hamas is possible, but will annihilate so many Palestinian civilizations that it will drag Israel into the abyss. It cannot be solved through political means. A two-state solution does not work when the charter of Hamas calls for the direct annihilation of Israel. Ultimately, whether now or in the future, it can and only will be solved through religious means which shape world civilization forever. Does the Temple Mount and Israel by extension belong to the group which owned it first, Jews? Does the Temple Mount belong to the group which controls it now, Muslims? Or does it go to which group can take it by force, as has been the case historically? Most importantly, to which group will God give it? So I think what the Muslims are beginning to see is that once they do the ceremony of the red heifer, this is going to change everything, because it's going to allow the third temple to be built, and it will be purified with those ashes, and then all the impure Jews worldwide that are still in their sins because they have not accepted King Jesus the Messiah and his blood covenant with many, they will take another blood covenant with many, with another king that they set upon the throne, which likely is King Charles III. Now, will they bring them under the Commonwealth, as Israel and the Palestinians have considered before? And because Israel's system, legally, their whole law was set up by the British government back, just before Israel became a nation. And so their whole system is based on the British system. So he easily could be the one who brokers the peace between the two. Let's look at this, though. The probable pagan origin of an ancient Jewish custom, purification with red heifer's ashes. One of the most enigmatic of all ancient Jewish religious customs was the use of ashes of a red heifer to purify people and objects defiled by a corpse. The ashes were combined with the spring water and other ingredients in a vessel to produce a mixture called water of lustration, which was sprinkled on the impure objects and people. We discuss 4 questions concerning the use of the ashes of the red heifer. Why a cow? Why red? Why ashes? Was it an original Jewish innovation, or like various other aspects of Jewish religion, the modification of an earlier pagan rite? He proposed that this Jewish rite resembles an ancient Egyptian rite in which red-haired men or cattle were scarified and burnt, and their ashes scattered with winnowing fans. We argue that the Jewish red heifer ash ritual may have originated in surrounding pagan cultures, reflecting the transition from pantheism to monotheism. The rite of the red heifer is ascribed in the Bible to Moses and his brother Aaron, the first high Jewish priest. But the slaughtering and burning of the red-haired animal were first performed by the priest Eleazar, and that's Numbers 19, 1 through 22, the Bible teaches us that the red heifer, more properly red cow, Hebrew para aduma, must be red or rather reddish brown in color without blemish and have never been yoked. After its slaughter, some of its blood was sprinkled 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting, the traveling temple. The carcass was then burnt outside the camp. Next, its ashes were then mixed with the ash of cedar wood, crimson stuff, and hyssop, all collected by a ritually clean man and placed outside the camp in a ritually pure place. Spring water, mayim, hayim, was then added to the mixture in a vessel to produce a solution called water of lustration. And this was sprinkled on the impure objects or people on the 3rd and 7th day after defilement, sustained by touching a corpse, a grave, or a human bone, or by being under the same roof with any of these. The central idea of the red heifer ritual seems to be the efficacy of ashes as a cathartic due to their connection with fire. Many related issues regarding the details of the act and the purity of the people involved have been treated since biblical times, mainly in the writings of the sages. The red heifer ritual addressed several of these principles: removal of pollution, washing, transformation into purity, fire, introduction of purity, sprinkling water. Why a cow and why its ashes? Cows or cattle were sacred in many ancient cultures. In India, ash from cow dung is still widely used as a cleansing agent. Since cows are sacred to Hindus, cow dung and other bovine products are considered extremely pure. In India, pollution due to a death, especially when it occurs in a house or temple, is purified by 5 products of the cow: dung, milk, ghee, curds, and urine, which are mixed together and applied as a detergent to cleanse the walls, or are applied to human beings. In Hinduism, the sanctity of the cow, known as the mother of life, makes this mixture almost sacramental in its efficacy. Since fire is regarded by Hindus as highly purifying, cow dung ashes are considered especially pure. Cattle urine was also used for purification by ancient Persians and goes far back into Indo-European past. Why red? The use of red hair subjects for sacrifice has venerable roots in the Middle East. The ancient Egyptians had a tradition of burning red-haired men and cattle and scattering their ashes with winnowing fans. This sacrifice was offered by the king at the grave of Osiris. As in the Jewish rite, the red-haired oxen were sacrificed in ancient Egypt also had to be perfectly red. A single black or white hair found on the beast disqualified it for the sacrifice. So now you can see when God called his people worse than Sodom, and he called them Sodom in Egypt where our Lord was crucified, now you can see the elements of Egypt that they are involved with. And this is why she's the scarlet harlot against God. And in Revelation, we see, that God's going to bring judgment against his own people, and he's going to save a remnant. Was purification with red heifer's ashes an original Jewish innovation or a modification of an earlier pagan rite? Human sacrifice was practiced in many societies and religions in the ancient Near Eastern world. Archaeologists and literary evidence has been found, mainly from the irrigation civilizations at both ends of the Fertile Crescent, namely Egypt and the kingdoms of Mesopotamia, where the documentation is good. And these influential societies had various cultural impacts on the smaller nations in the Levant through trade, marriage, and diplomatic affairs, as well as through direct conquest and control. The Canaanite culture that co-occupied the same land as the Israelites regularly practiced child sacrifice, intimations of which are found even in the Bible. And it gives all the scriptures: Leviticus 18, Deuteronomy 18, 2 Kings, in many verses. Jews, however, replaced the Canaanite tradition of human sacrifice with animal sacrifice, charity, and prayer. And that was written by Ben Maimon. Probable similar Levantine rites that were lost were the origin of the Jewish custom of using the ashes of a red heifer. We argue that the Jewish religion, which was established and accepted by some tribes in the Levant more than 3,000 years ago, was influenced by the Egyptian culture, especially following the Egyptian rule of the southern Levant in the late Bronze Age, circa 1550 to 1200 BC. McAllister proposed that the red heifer ritual is probably very ancient. We propose that the Jewish religion, however, seems to have changed the original pagan ritual involving human sacrifice in certain cases to one that purifies from defilement only with animal sacrifice. The enigmatic origin of this rite, no doubt, accords with the general lack of detailed knowledge on the transition from a pagan Canaanite tribe into the Israelite nation. The dramatic cultural change from the pantheism to monotheism should be studied without religious restrictions in order to understand its roots, probably in the late Bronze Age of the Near East. Israel's TV Channel 12 News released an investigative report about the 5 heifers that were brought to the Jewish state and the supposed funneling of government funds to construct the third temple. Israeli journalist Omri Maniv, who has posted to social media multiple times about the red heifers and their meaning, conducted the investigation. Last month, the journalist tweeted about an experiment conducted by Bar-Ilan University Professor Zohar Amar, who attempted to determine how many people could be ritually purified by one red heifer. In the study, Professor Amar said that one red heifer would provide enough ashes to purify 660 billion purifications. So there is the blood covenant with many. That's how many it can purify. Maniv argued that the government has shifted funds from other accounts for the purpose of preparing for the purification rituals and possibly the third temple. Many rabbis have forbidden their followers from going up to the Temple Mount because they are not in a state of ritual purity. He also argues that the funds are being shifted quietly to not raise tensions internally and with the Arab population. Near the site of the biblical Shiloh, where the tabernacle was kept during the time of the judges, a group of Jews descended from the tribe of Levi and the priestly families enacted a practice run of the purification ceremony. So they've already practiced it. The event occurred at a site called Ancient Shiloh, or Shiloh in Hebrew, affiliated with the Temple Institute, and contained explanation of the priestly functions, including sacrifice. The event also featured a temple banquet containing foods from the Second Temple and biblical periods. The highlight of the event was the presentation of one of the 5 red heifers. We are yearning for the temple, and suddenly there is a red heifer here, and we understand what that means. Something is about to happen, stated Kobi Memo, CEO of Ancient Shiloh. According to the Book of Numbers, the tabernacle and the temple were purified with the ashes of a red heifer. The oldest of the red heifers brought from Texas last year is just months away from being the required age to sacrifice for the purification ritual. The use of red heifers for purification has caused consternation for some Palestinians as well as secular Jews. On the Hamas-owned Al-Aqsa program, Dr. Ahmad Shihab said the heifers were proof that the Israeli government has a plan to cause a religious war in the region, and the settler state religious claims regarding the Jews' right to Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Palestinian News Network also ran a story last week accusing the Israeli government of plotting with settlers to reconstruct the Third Temple and storm Al-Aqsa. So those taking the mark of the beast a beast is a king, but a beast is also an animal like a cow. So could these two coincide? The mark of the king, the royal cipher, which is what I told you God had revealed to me in the dream that it was, that I had. But interestingly, when they make this covenant with many and they purify the people with these ashes, is this the mark of doom, with the king and his royal number? And then, I don't know, it all seems to be coming together to that end. So let's look at biblicalanthropology.blogspot.com about the red heifer, and this was written April 19th of 2015 by Alice C. Lindsley. The biblical priesthood appears to have originated among the peoples of the Nile Valley when the Green Sahara was able to sustain herds of longhorned cattle. Cattle were first domesticated in the Upper Nile Valley about 15,000 years ago. The term for cow, nag, or nagi, or ninga, corresponds to the Egyptian ning. The words Edom, Odom, and Adam are derived from the same root and originally referred to the red clay that washed down the Upper Nile from the Ethiopian highlands. Well, he was actually made from the soil of Holy Mount Moriah. And he is Adam, or Hadam, meaning the blood. Blood was not only the substance of life, it was also the substance by which the people received cleansing through their ministry of their priests. And this is why the red calf was the preferred sacrifice for purity. Okay, so it's the blood covenant with many that's strengthened with God, because the life is in the blood. And this is why when they choose this red heifer's blood over the blood of the Lord God Almighty, who came in the flesh as our Messiah, our Savior, and they're still under the law, but Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, then this is why the life is in the blood. And if we're purified by God's living sacrifice with his living blood, and if the Jews reject their king, then that is the lifeblood that gives us eternal life. Because it says blood was the substance of life, and it was also the substance by which the people received cleansing. And this is how we are purified in the Messiah's righteousness, through his blood that cleanses us. And this is why the covenant with many that's coming with the red heifer is a covenant of death, because that is not the life-giving blood. It's God's life-giving blood that cleanses and purifies us. And this is why Israel must realize this and accept their king. Aaron created the golden calf, a representation of Horus, the divine son of the Creator. The image incorporated the sun and would have been a representation of the divine overshadowing or appointment of the calf of God. And they show a picture of what it would have looked like. It's an abomination, so I don't really want to show you, but it's basically, the calf, and then it's got horns, and then it's got the sun disk in between on its head. The calf is suggestive of Horus as a child. Horus's form is either as an adult male or more usually as a boy wearing the side lock typical of royal Egyptian youth. Horus as a boy is often shown on Sippy dominating crocodiles and serpents. Consider this in light of the woman, the child, and the dragon in Revelation 12. Consider the red heifer, Numbers 19:9, that stands as a perpetual sacrifice. The red heifer is sacrificed and burned outside the camp, and the ashes used for water of lustration, which means to purify by propitiatory offering or other sacred ceremony. After the completion of the second temple, the ashes of the red heifer were available for people who came to the temple. At the entrance to the women's court, there was a stone vessel called the kilal, which held ashes of the red heifer, and the ashes were mixed with water and used for purification ceremonies. The association of blood and purity. The Hebrew root meaning pure is thr, thur, and it corresponds to hausa or ham, word for clean, Toro, and the Tamil word for holy, Tiru. All are related to the Proto-Dravidian word fro blood, for the sacrificing priesthood was found among all these peoples. The color red represented blood and life among the ancient Nilotes, and Horite priests regarded the red heifer as a representation of Horus, the son of the Creator, born miraculously of Hathor. And she is shown with cow horns cradling the sun, and this indicates overshadowing by the Creator, whose emblem was the sun, and Hathor's totem was the cow, and she is shown in Nilotic shrines holding her infant in a stable. Hathor and Horus are expressions of the earliest messianic expectations among Abraham's Nilo-Saharan ancestors. The perpetual sacrifice of the red heifer is older than the Levitical priesthood, and it pertains to Abraham's Nilo-Saharan cattle herding ancestors and speaks of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Messiah came as high priest of the good things to come with the greater and more perfect tabernacle not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? From Hebrews 9:11 through 14. Unfortunately, there are Christians who fail to recognize that Jesus' crucifixion and glorious resurrection have fulfilled all the archetypes of the Old Testament. The Reverend Clyde Lott, a Pentecostal cattle breeder from Mississippi, was the first one breeding the red heifers to export to Israel, to establish a breeding line of red heifers. When the Lord revealed to me that Jerusalem and her people and her ancient monarchy played the scarlet harlot against God, and that she is the mystery of Babylon, the great mother of harlots, in the book of Revelation, we see Jesus, the Messiah, chastising the Pharisees and Sadducees of the Sanhedrin, telling them that if they do not believe that he is, I am he, that they will die in their sins. And this is for a future generation of Sanhedrin members, that if they keep refusing him as their king, they will die in their sins. And why? So the Antichrist spirit is the ultra-Orthodox Sanhedrin in Israel in the last days. And it was the Antichrist spirit that was there in John's day that he wrote about. But the Lord revealed, as you know, from my former videos, that Jerusalem and her people and her ancient monarchy played the scarlet harlot against God. So what do we have in John 8? We have the harlot being brought in front of them, and they want her stoned, and Jesus did not condemn her. And right after he delivers the adulterous woman, he tells the Pharisees and Sadducees that he is the Messiah, the light of the world. Then Jesus said again to them, I go my way, and ye shall seek me, and shall die in your sins. Whither I go, ye cannot come. And then the Jews said, Will he kill himself, because he saith, Whither I go, you cannot come? And he said unto them, Ye are from beneath, and I am from above. Ye are of this world, and I am not of this world. I said therefore unto you, that ye shall die in your sins. For if you believe not that I am he, ye shall die in your sins. So he's talking to the Sanhedrin members. And then in the last days, we have the revived Sanhedrin that have the Antichrist spirit. And they are the ones that want to perform the ceremony of the red heifer. And it will be the covenant with the many of the Jews to try to purify them from their sins. But if they don't believe that Jesus is their king, Yeshua, they will die in their sins, and it is a covenant of death. And then they said, Who art thou? And Jesus said unto them, Even the same which I said unto you from the beginning. I have many things to say and to judge of you. But he that sent me is true, and I speak to the world those things which I've heard of him. And they understood not that he spake to them of the Father. And then Jesus said unto them, When ye have lifted up the Son of Man, then shall ye know that I am he, and that I do nothing of myself, but as my Father hath taught me, I speak these things, and he that sent me is with me. The Father hath not left me alone, for I do always those things that please him. As he spake these words, many believed on him. Then Jesus said to those Jews which believed on him, If ye continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And Jesus said unto them, If God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God, neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And because I tell you the truth, you believe me not. Which of you convinceth me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do you not believe me? He that is of God heareth God's words. Ye therefore hear them not, because ye are not of God. And then answered the Jews and said unto him, Say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil? And Jesus answered, I have not a devil, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And I seek not mine own glory. There is one that seeketh and judgeth. Verily I say unto you, if a man keep my saying, he shall never see death. And then said the Jews unto him, Now we know that thou hast a devil. Abraham is dead, and the prophets. And thou sayest, If a man keep my saying, he shall never taste death. Art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead, and the prophets are dead, whom makest thyself? And Jesus answered, If I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father that honoreth me, of whom you say that he is your God. Yet ye have not known him, but I know him. And if I should say I know him not, I shall be a liar like unto you. But I know him and keep his saying. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And then said the Jews unto him, Thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. And then took they up stones to cast at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. So you can see that they're the scarlet harlot and Mystery Babylon, the great mother of harlots. And God is coming to bring his wrath to those who will die in the